Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of The Person You Want to Be. I am your host, Eric Teplitz. Today, I am honored to have with me as my guest, Gordon Marino. For 27 years, Gordon Marino taught philosophy and related courses as a professor at St. Olaf College in Northfield, Minnesota, where he also was curator, director, I'll clarify that with him, of the Hong Kierkegaard Library until his retirement in August of 2022. In addition to teaching philosophy, Gordon has been a boxer, a boxing coach, a football coach, a boxing correspondent for the Wall Street Journal, and a contributing writer to numerous other publications, including the Atlantic Monthly, the New York Times Magazine, and American Poetry Review, to name just a few. Gordon holds a BA from Columbia University, an MA from the University of Pennsylvania, and a PhD from the University of Chicago. He is the author of Kierkegaard in the Present Age and co-editor of the Cambridge Companion to Kierkegaard, among his extensive credits as an author and editor. His most recent book, published in 2018, is The Existentialist's Survival Guide: How to Live Authentically in an Inauthentic Age. Gordon Marino, welcome to The Person You Want to Be.
Thanks for having me on. Really honored to be here.
I am thrilled, and you really are kind of an ideal guest for the show, given its subject matter. I want to start this interview by reading an excerpt from your book, The Existentialist Survival Guide, as a launching point for a discussion about becoming the person you want to be, which I see as a lifelong project. And I'm fascinated by how our sense of who this is, who it is that we want to be, evolves over the course of our lifetime. And you write in your chapter on the subject of authenticity, you write the following. This is an excerpt. While there is no unequivocal definition of authenticity, there is more to authenticity than refraining from putting on airs. To become authentic is to become yourself. When Nietzsche implores, become who you are, like Heidegger, he is prodding us to create ourselves. For Nietzsche, Sartre, and Heidegger, we are a witch's brew of culture, feelings, experiences, and evaluations. And we create ourselves out of this melange as though our lives were an artwork. Kierkegaard was emphatic that somewhere beneath our historically and culturally influenced vision of ourselves, there is a true self. Etymologically speaking, both in the Latin and the German, the idea of authenticity is intrinsically bound up with the notion of making something your own. Kierkegaard believed that we make our views our own not by hitting like on Facebook, but by passionately relating ourselves to those ideas and expressing them in the medium of action. That's a lot. That's a lot to take in, but I think it's great because you kind of encapsulate a number of different existentialist thinkers and their points of view about what it means to be authentic. Are we creating ourselves? Are we, basically essentially choosing who it is that we want to be, or are we unearthing it? Is there something we're trying to, get at, which is more the Kierkegaard point of view?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
And you also write at the beginning of your epilogue in the book that you say that leading an authentic life remains a Sisyphean labor. So this is not an easy task to become the person we want to be our authentic selves. With that as a long introduction, I want to start the interview by asking you about your earliest memories as a boy of who or what it was you wanted to be.
That's a left hook.
A friendly one.
I think to tell you the truth, I think I modeled myself on my older brother who died this past summer, who was a great athlete and a very gentle person, and so much different than a lot of jocks at the time. And he used to take me on his dates with him. His girlfriends would say, "What are you doing?" And he was 10 years older and never teased me. And just this kind and this kind, competent person. So he was. I think I modeled myself, internalized him a lot. So that's our internalizations have a lot to do with the person we want to be.
Yeah. First of all, I'm sorry for your loss.
Yeah, it's terrible. It was really such a well, what can I say? But yeah. So in addition to those two views, the views of those philosophers, I think Freud's very important. This idea of identification, and that we incorporate people as we grow up. I even noticed that when my sons first met my older brother, they were really confused. They were young, and it was like, he doesn't look exactly like Dad, but because I'd internalized Tom's voice so much, and so to these identifications we make early on, I think are very important, and many people are deprived of good ones, right? I had the privilege of studying with Philip Rieff, who was a famous Freud scholar, the author of The Mind of the Moralist, and I was kind of when I was in graduate school, I was still in my adolescent phase, being Italian American, still wanting to be in the mafia. It's still ridiculous stuff, and dressed with the earring. And Rieff was really, really formal. Most formal. We'd wear a top hat sometimes, and he waited until I was identified with him enough to say to me, you dress like a thug. What's the story here? You don't even know that earring that you're wearing, where it comes from, what the history of it is. And interesting enough, another part of myself in the earlier days would have, no matter what, how self-destructive, would have gotten up, you know what I mean, and said something, and that would have been it. And he said, identify up instead of down, right? And identify up. And he always saw professors and people and I always tried to get that message across to my class, that you get into when you're in a position of authority, there's a lot of responsibility there, because people are going to identify with you, or and so that's very important. They're going to take you in.
I love what you said about how we incorporate people into our lives and how much that shapes us. And I was actually going to ask you about Rieff a little further down the line.
Sure.
But you mentioned your older brother, and what was his name? Thomas. And you said that among the characteristics he had were that he was kind and competent, I believe you said. Can you get a little more specific, maybe about the things that you really emulated in him growing up, and or either the traits that he had, or what it was about him that you admired and wanted to emulate?
Well, I mean, he was honest. There's a lot of bad things going on in the household. I always felt safe with him. He's always protected me. I was the bat boy for his baseball teams. He got to a high level. He was playing minor league baseball at one point, and all-state in football. And so he was a big star. So that was kind of cool around town. And so I emulated that, his athletic ability, and he is taking time to teach me stuff, which was really helped me. The joy it took us being together. Here I am, 10 years younger, and that was really cool. Okay, I'm going to tell you something that's, I guess this is okay, but this is the kind of guy he was. So I don't know, maybe I should. Okay, so he, so back in the old days, people would say, "You're a jerk off," or you're jerking off, right? You're masturbating, right? And nobody ever said a word about, Tom said to me, hey man, everybody masturbates. What are you talking about? Don't worry about it. That's the kind of honesty he had, and protected me from some of the myths, like the mass. So protected me from some toxic masculinity.
Huh.
I mean, that
Right. I remember I read a bit of an article that you wrote in which you talked about a fight that broke out during a football game, and your brother refused to participate in it, right? Because he felt it was ridiculous, and
it
he
was
was on the
ridiculous.
bench. And you were initially disappointed that he
I
didn't
was
get.
pissed off at him.
Yeah. So tell me about that.
Yeah. No, it was just, here he is sitting on the bench, 50 guys in a complete melee on the football field in college, and he's sitting there on the bench. Well, but that's the kind of independence he had. You know what I mean? He wasn't, and he was captain of the baseball team in college, and so it wasn't like anybody held it against him. But he says, this is just foolishness. It was just baby stuff. It wasn't over anything.
Right. So was that something that you like? Did you change your mind initially? You were upset with him for not getting involved. Did
yeah, I did change. Yeah, I did. Yeah.
Now I know you grew up in the Jersey Shore. Is that right? Whereabouts?
Right where the show, that great show took place. The Jersey Shore, the MTV show.
Oh, I never saw it. So you're before my time, right. after my time. Yeah. So, whereabouts along the Jersey Shore did you grow up?
In Tom's River, but spent a lot of time in Seaside, which is where those guys hung out and everything.
Right.
So.
Yeah, not too far from my backyard growing up, as we discussed.
Right.
Before
That's
we
right.
started talking about in Philadelphia. Yeah. And so I'm interested about. So you mentioned that your brother was maybe the singular kind of influence, or certainly positive influence in your life growing up. Can you give us a little more context of your childhood environment? You mentioned that your brother protected you and made you feel safe, and I know that it was kind of a volatile environment from what I've read. Can you give us a little more context about the environment you grew up in, and also maybe like the directions that might have sent you in, were it not for some pivotal people you encountered along the way?
Right. So I grew up in this household in which there was my parents just didn't respect one another, and my father drank quite a bit. My mother had a very bad temper, and it was scary, just the fighting all the time. I mean, one time my mother was about to stab my father, and I stepped in.
Wow.
I mean, it was that part. But on the other hand, she was such a model of she had been sexually abused very badly as a child, from the age of 5 till 12, and had her stepfather put in jail. And she had some. Then her brother got killed in the war, the only other person, and was very poor. And my father drank quite a bit. But the one thing about him is he liked being together. And a lot of guys at that time in the 50s and 60s, a lot of men of his age didn't hang around with their kids, and we did everything together. And so he taught me how to enjoy. It was the joys of being a parent, despite all the. So it's this mixture of love and violence.
Wow, how interesting.
Yeah. I think it's good Italian, and I think that's sort of a lot of Italian families.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And one of the things that I really appreciate about having just reread your book, The Existentialist Survival Guide, and having read a bunch of your wonderful New York Times articles, which I highly recommend to listeners and viewers, as well as the book. I just love, you often talk about ambiguity and being able to accept contradictory traits, in people, and how essential this is to getting along with people, right? That generally, I mean, the vast majority of us, if not all of us, are not all good or all bad. We are a mixture of things. We are a combination of things. And that's what makes us human. And the importance of kind of being able to handle cognitive dissonance of.
Yeah, it's
right.
So important. Yeah, there's such a tendency to idealize people and then demonize them when things don't go right. So I've seen that quite a bit in my life.
Yeah, I have a quote here. I have a bunch of things that I pulled from your book, and at one point you referred to yourself as a quote unquote borderline criminal adolescent.
Yeah.
So
That was
what did that look like? What kind of behavior are we talking about?
anybody listening? I don't know.
No one's listening. Don't worry.
Yeah, as a kid, I looked up to mafia guys. I thought they were cool and tough, and I followed that childish thinking into even when I went to Columbia. I worked on what's this? I took Joe Pesci's job at a topless bar on 49th and 7th Street when he went out to make Raging Bull. I didn't work there long.
No, not Joe Pesci.
Joe Pesci, yeah.
Oh, the actor.
The actor, yeah.
I thought, okay.
No, I'm sorry, not Joe Pesci. I mean
the guy he was playing.
The fighter.
The fighter.
Yeah.
Yeah. What was his name?
What?
I'm forgetting as well, but I remember.
Yeah,
the
all
story.
of a sudden,
Jake LaMotta. Was it?
Jake LaMotta, yeah, Jake LaMotta.
Yeah, because
De
Niro was
De Niro was Jake.
De Niro was playing Jake in Raging Bull, and Jake went out to Hollywood, right, to like essentially meet with De Niro. Is that right? And so De Niro could get to know him. So you took Jake's job when Jake was off with
right, Hollywood. And it was a mob bar.
Right. Wow.
So that was really good.
How old were you then?
It was in the 70s, and the guy who the manager got his throat slit one night after work from one side to the other. He was back in 6 weeks, and they wanted you to kill people if they acted up in there and stuff. So it was, but luckily enough, I got really drunk one night and jumped on, not when I was working, but jumped on the bar, and that was it. I was fired, but if I hadn't, I didn't, down the line, they would have been asking me to do stuff that was unconscionable. Now, interestingly enough, I talked to, they would have been saying, go out and break so-and-so's legs. And, I was a recruit. I was in the, I got to know Gay Talese a little bit, the writer, and he was enmeshed in the Bonanno family when he wrote Honor Thy Father. And so one of the times I met him, I was telling him about this experience, and I said, I thought they were really cool. And Gay said, well, they are cool. And this is after the book on the Bonanno family for 5 years, and he said, well, they are cool.
What did he mean by that, do you think?
Well, they're cool. I mean, the way they carry themselves.
Charismatic.
Yeah, charismatic, make their own rules. And I relate a lot of that to thug culture. So for people that feel disempowered, these guys, I'm going back in history, like I think these outlaws were going, starting probably with Jesse James, were looked upon as heroes by many people.
Right.
If you're a marginalized group of people, thug life, these guys that don't take shit from anybody, right? Make their own rules and are willing to, is very, very attractive to a
yeah. So that makes me
Columbia student.
That makes me wonder, when exactly did you first get into boxing, and how did that interest translate into actual?
That was that come from, you get smacked around enough, and you start thinking about self-defense. But my grandfather was a boxing instructor in the Marines, and but the funny thing is my father, I played football and all the baseball, all that, and but my father was really against the boxing because he thought it was so tied up with bad images of Italian Americans, the mobsters, because it was very corrupt in the 50s. My grandfather would take me aside, and he was a World War I vet and a bad dude, boy. He was a small guy, but you did not mess with him. And and he showed me some stuff, and that's how I got involved in it. But
How old were you?
Hmm?
How old were you then?
Probably 6 or 7.
Wow. Okay. So pretty young.
He
Yeah.
told me stories about Jack Johnson and stuff, because that was from his era, you know. So that was pretty cool.
Right. I know maybe in part by your brother's inspiration, you had big aspirations to be a football player. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And you were, I'm guessing now in high school, a pretty successful athlete in terms of both in baseball and football.
Mhm, yeah.
Yeah. And so tell me, I mean, how serious were you about pursuing football as, as a career, making
Oh,
it to the pros, and why did that not pan out? And how did you process that disappointment? It's a big
yeah.
question, I realize.
Good question, though. It's one a lot of us have to face in life when existence just slams the door in your face. Yeah, I was just completely passionate about it. I was like a Labrador Retriever. I loved it. Everyone else on the team would be mad because I said, let's practice longer, or I'd run sprints afterwards. And I just loved it. I just really enjoyed it. And I wanted nothing more than, I didn't want to live if I didn't wasn't in the NFL. And I think also part of that was, a bit of a sibling rivalry with my brother. My brother played at Lafayette first, but I had to play Division I football there. So I think there was a lot of that went on. But in the end, I went to Bowling Green. I got a football appointment at West Point, and it was interesting. That was a big dream in the family for my father, and for me to go play at West Point, and they gave me a football appointment. And it was weird because my father said, "No, man, you're going to get," and he would never say something like this. And because it was his dream for me to go there, play at West Point, right? And here I get this appointment, supposed to go up and sign. He said, "You'll be kicked out in 10 minutes. Like, don't go," which was so
Thanks,
weird.
thanks, Dad.
No, but I mean, he didn't. I was shocking for him to say. Yes.
Well,
So
yeah. What in that response was shocking to you?
that instead of saying you can shape up in the next 6 months, or he just saw that I was so far into bad stuff, drugs, crime. He could tell that I was, I couldn't take orders. I got kicked out of school all the time.
I see. So yeah,
if you can't make it through high school without getting kicked out.
So anyway, so what happened at West Point?
I didn't go, no, so I didn't sign. So then I went to Bowling Green, and then I got hurt at Bowling Green, and football got me into Columbia, but then so I was too slow to make it to the pros as a receiver. But I wasn't willing to own that yet. But so I hurt my shoulder in practice, in my first practice at Columbia, not first practice, but in a scrimmage at Columbia. And back then they didn't have MRIs and that stuff, and couldn't play. And the coach said something, and I started to fight with the coach on the field. And I don't think anybody's ever seen anything like that in the Ivy League. I mean, using the F-bombs.
So was that the end? Getting into the fight?
Yeah,
with the
that
coach?
was
like,
pretty much.
Did that derail your football hopes?
Well, I had to apologize, and but the shoulder didn't heal, and then I was done. But that was freaking crazy. It was. Yeah. I look back on it and think, oh my God, it's like. It's funny, okay.
Yeah.
Here's going. I wrote a piece in the New York Times about regrets, and the fact that I'm laughing about that still shows. I mean, I regret it from a career point of view. Because the next day the PR person said they think you have a chance of making it to the pros. They didn't know I was hurt. The PR person at Columbia, which it wouldn't have happened. But so I laugh about that, which means I really, at some level, regret it on a career basis, but not on a moral basis. So the difference between that kind of regret and I was a bully at some point or something, you know what I mean? Moral regrets.
Sure.
And I think is a really important distinction. So most of the time when you ask men about regrets that they have, they'll give you ones like I just did, like how cool I was. I must still think that's cool, I guess, in my adolescent mind.
There are a couple of things I want to pull on out of what you shared. So one of them was you were not yet willing, you said, to accept that speed was a limiting factor for you, right? Is that right?
Yeah.
What is the, how do we reconcile with our limits? How do we, first of all, even understand what they truly are? Because oftentimes it's our perception limits ourselves to an extent that's not necessary, right? Like sometimes we really put unnecessary barriers on ourselves just through our own short-sightedness or, either maybe lack of self-confidence.
Right.
So sometimes we shortchange ourselves and we don't even get to figure out where our limits are. And then there are other instances where we brush up against them, but maybe we don't want to accept them. So, and it sounds like that was the case for you in terms of the speed.
Yeah, well, it was also, I wrote a piece in the New York Times Magazine because I coached my sons, who's it's called In Defense of the Fanatical Sport Parent. Now, he had a bazooka of an arm and was very successful in high school, but he was only 5'10" and wasn't fast. And, he ended up getting a football appointment to Air Force and then transferred. But, his whole thing was, I was passing on, I thought it was, part of me was passing on what knowledge I had. I didn't know how to work with my hands or any of that stuff. So I tried to pass this art on to him and he loved it, but it wasn't in the car. He's too short and he wasn't fast enough to make it to that next level.
Right.
I mean, which I'm glad we both, one of the things he did experience was he did play at a high enough level that, man, you see the difference between.
He played it. I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. He played at a high enough level that what?
He made it to a level where he was playing at a super famous high school in Minnesota called Cretin, where all these two Heisman Trophy winners, he was a quarterback. But to see the real excellence, I mean, I remember one day on the field, even at Bowling Green, where I saw another wide receivers super fast. I had a friend who ran a 4.3 40. I get it. So even sometimes when you don't make it, you get a sense of excellence. Oh, this is what it takes.
Right. Or maybe you reach your own potential, even if it's not enough for the outside world to open the gates and say you may enter, right? Like you at
that's
least
right.
like,
yeah. But that's really that's a crushing disappointment to something. Well, as a boxing trainer, I've had to throw in the towel in a pro fight in which the crowd wanted to kill me. I was a trainer, was on televised bout, and the guy had knocked my guy down 3 times, but they weren't bad knockdowns. They were just half slip, half. You know what I mean? It wasn't like boom. He had only 3 rounds to go, but he was getting hammered, and the other guy was pretty strong. It was only 2 rounds, I think 2 or 3 rounds ago, and I threw in the towel, and I can remember the towel being in the fucking air. The towel's in the air, right? And lo and behold, he lands a punch when I'm throwing the towel in, right? Right? He lands not a knockout punch, but a good jab. And the crowd wanted to kill me. The other guy wouldn't even shake hands with me. The referee said it was the best stoppage he'd ever seen. Because he thought he's not going to win. He's just going to get beat up more.
So it's just a matter of happenstance that he happened to land a punch at the moment that.
Yeah, that's all. I mean, he wasn't.
Yeah, but he wasn't headed for a win.
No, there was no way. If there were, and it was funny because Mike Tyson called me afterwards, and he was mad. My fighter was mad at me. And Mike said, "Well, it's better he's mad at you. He's going to blame it all on you, and he'll come back and and
It'll make him hungrier for the next time.
Yeah, but it's humiliating to get laid out. Really. I mean, that could have happened where he got knocked.
Oh, I got you.
You know
Yeah, so
I mean?
you saved him from himself in a way. Yeah.
Yeah, and so Mike was saying that was man, but boy, it really told me how bloodthirsty people are. Though, boy, they just wanted to. Man, it was like being in the Coliseum. And it was my first time I was in the corner with a professional, and Angelo Dundee was my mentor. He was Ali's trainer, and when I started handling pro fighters, he said, "They're going to break your heart, man. Don't do it." Andrew's talk all the time. I love him so much. He's such a loving guy, and I would always wear his shirt, and I would keep a momentum in my pocket. And he had died, and before the fight, I'm saying, "Ange, don't make this a complicated one, will you?" And it ends up being it was a nightmare.
I want to touch back. I want to make sure that I don't miss this. So you had mentioned this just almost like in passing that with go ahead. Do you have something else you want to say?
Yeah, Erica, just one thing I wanted to add here is like, so there are plenty of times as authority figure or people that are in positions of authority or teacher, whatever, that you got to tell somebody it's not going to happen. And like, I wish somebody had told me that. Say, yeah, man, okay, yeah, you can play in the Ivy League or whatever, but you're not going to make it to the end of it. It's just in a way that's not like, in a just quiet sit down and, you don't have to do this to be a man, or you know what I mean? That,
Right.
What's your investment in this? I mean, I didn't even care about the Vietnam War. I didn't care about anything but football. And so there's times in life when you got to tell people it's not gonna happen.
But would a young person really be able to receive that if his heart was set on this dream? Would he accept that even from someone that he looked up to?
Yeah, I know.
That's right. I mean,
yeah.
very
You're
easily.
Right. You're absolutely right.
Yeah,
you're absolutely right. Yeah.
And you mentioned almost in passing that at the time you kind of didn't want to live if you weren't going to be in the NFL. You said that, and I only really caught that because I've read your book and other things that you've written. But this is a really huge thing, right? I mean, you have this. It speaks to this dream was, in a sense, you defined yourself by it at the time, right? And so when it wasn't going to be, perhaps through no fault of your own, you got injured. But for whatever reason, these things, don't pan out. In fact, they don't pan out more. Dreams of being a professional athlete don't pan out way more often than they do pan out, right? So I imagine that a lot of people can relate to having this huge dream, and for any number of reasons, it not working out. I have my own version of that with music, which is another story. But
sure,
I'm interested. Yeah, I'm interested to know how you dealt with, how crushing that disappointment was for you, and how you found your way out of it and able to move on with your life, because you obviously moved on in a big way, and maybe in an unexpected way, by entering the world of academia as you did, and becoming a really inspirational mentor to a lot of kids, both as a coach and as a professor, as a teacher, also the general public, as a writer. So these things never would have happened, or only happened in a sense. I shouldn't say never, but they may well never have happened if you had succeeded in your football career. So
probably wouldn't have,
right.
Yeah.
So,
Well,
but I'm really interested in hearing from you about the disappointment of that, the devastation of it, and what you attribute to your ability to overcome it, or climb out of it, or move on from it.
Well, it wasn't any ability of mine. I just got drunk doing drugs for a long time. I was a really disturbed kid, and but one ability I had was, if someone of intelligence and a good heart reached out to me, I was able to take their hand, which a lot of kids don't have. So all this talk about mental health, if you don't have trust, it's some of the kids I work with in boxing, they can't even look you in the eye. They just don't have that trust. I had enough trust to grab the hand of someone who was willing to help me. And I had a wonderful professor at Bowling Green who thought I had some talent, and he said, "You need to get some. You know what training at the Division I level in football is. You need to go play with the big boys in the intellectual world. You shouldn't, right?" And he went over and did research on my background, and he took the time to, and that was a huge help. Except when I got to New York, I was like a kid in a candy shop.
Okay, so it was the pastor. I don't remember hearing about this or reading about this, but this pastor was very influential in.
Wasn't a pastor; it's a philosophy professor.
Oh, I'm sorry, philosophy professor. And this was who was this?
At Bowling Green.
Yeah,
Serge Kapler's name was,
what was the name?
Alfred Serge Kapler, Kappler.
Got it. Oh yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So he took an interest in you, and he saw a potential in you, and kind of redirected you, and you used the word ability. I like that. You had the ability to accept his reaching out and his interest in you.
I had enough trust, and the rest of and this is another thing I got out of this as a coach was with these kids will spend their life with sports today even more than in my era. I mean, the whole family is organized around it. Camps all summer. I get the hockey maniacs out here. It's like their whole life, and then they go play in the juniors to play at a Division III school, and then something happens, and coach nobody contacts him again. Now I had one kid when I was coaching at St. Olaf, he quit football, and he tearfully said, "I don't know, my dad and I don't have anything to talk about anymore."
Wow.
And so I'm really a big one on following up with people who that's you know what I mean, whose whole life, whose identity was built around this activity, and then all of a sudden it's gone.
Yeah. And you're talking about not just having your identity wrapped up in it, but having your social connections wrapped up in it.
Right. That's right.
You're invisible all of a sudden.
Yeah. Even with the team,
without it.
Even with teammates, it's hard to hang around. I think with certain sports, you don't have the same relationship anymore, and yet no one follows them up, and it's really heartbreaking. It's really heartbreaking.
Wow.
So that was something I learned as a coach, to follow up with, check in with kids who stop playing and see how they're doing, and sometimes some of my recruit into boxing, which that helps. That helps because they go from football to boxing, and boxing's pretty cool, so that's been good medicine for some of them.
Very interesting. I want to talk more about that as we continue the conversation. You wrote a piece called "In Defense of Boxing," and I want to talk about as far as things containing elements of good and bad and cognitive dissonance, and I think boxing is a rich subject for that. But before we go there, we will go there. But I want to since you mentioned the importance of relationships, and of especially as a young person, of someone taking an interest in you, and also having the capacity to trust, when you trust the right people who can help you, and then be willing to accept their help. This can be very difficult for people of any age. But you wrote a really beautiful article for the New York Times called "The Long Conversation."
Oh yeah.
And in it, you write about what you call, quote unquote, the matchless healing power of relationships.
Oh, don't get me go ahead.
So why don't we talk about, you already mentioned this one philosophy professor who helped steer you towards the academic pursuits when football didn't work out. But I know of at least three others very significant people in your life that were game changers for you, and that your relationships with them were game changers for you.
Right.
You already mentioned one of them, Philip Rieff, but in the article, "The Long Conversation," I want to talk about this therapist that you met, Beatrice, and how do you pronounce her last name?
Beatrice Beebe. She's a famous, the most famous people in the world on infant-mother interaction. But she was 26 when I went to see her, and I was 19.
How did you first encounter her?
Well, I did have enough sensibility, and I went to Columbia and saw that it was freaking crazy to just go to the counseling center, perchance. So I had some self-awareness there. But the point I mean, that was the most gratifying article I've ever written, because the New York Times, I mean, she talks to me almost every day now. We just check in, and it's not like it's like we're family members, but at the same time, with some bad stuff going on, she can switch gears into therapy. But the importance of relationships and changing who we are, and the whole mental health system today is, it's either take a pill or these quick sessions, unless you're rich. If you're rich and you can afford to go to therapy, and don't have to go through insurance, that you can get decent therapy, I'm sure. But there's just what heals is, and Freud recognized this, was relationships, transference, that connection. And so I would see her 3 times a week. There's no way in a million years you could do that today. Yeah. It's like once every. I wanted to see somebody here. It took 3 months, and it was a complete disaster. They don't even train people to listen anymore. It's just so. It appalls me, the state of all this talk about mental health, and there really is no really good counseling. Requires establishing a relationship in time. And again, a lot of the therapists I know, and I'm in that world. I was studying clinical psychology before philosophy, and they don't want to deal with the insurance companies, so they only see rich people.
Who can pay out of pocket.
Who can pay out of pocket, don't have to, that's, but just so she taught me that she was always there, and there was never any crossing of boundaries, or I could, and she's just always there and stuck with me, and I've tried to be there for that. So that was a lesson for me in terms of my relationship with students and athletes, to just be there, always be there. And so that was more than just psychotherapy for me. It was a lesson on what kind of person to be. I wanted to be.
Well, this is a very relevant. This is a very relevant topic, because in your book and perhaps articles of yours, you talk about how you counsel students, and that they are naturally, quite naturally and appropriately, concerned about their futures and what career to choose, and what vocation, and how to make these choices, that when there's an incredible amount of pressure on young people, and the cost of education now is such that it's
right.
Parents and the kids themselves are expecting an ROI, right? Like, hey, I'm putting all this money in, and I'm going to be in, I need results, man. And you lamented at one point, or maybe in numerous things that you've written, that while kids, have sought your counsel about career, that you would like to see them concerned not just about like what job are they going to have or what career they're going to pursue, but the kind of person that they're going to aspire to be and become. And, again, as I said at the beginning of this, I think that this is a lifelong pursuit and endeavor, and it evolves and changes as we evolve and change, and as the world evolves and changes. It's something we have to, I think, consistently wrestle with. Is
Can I interrupt there, though?
Yeah.
Okay, but you're saying we evolve and change this. I think many people just give up on it. I think you're really unusual in the sense that you place so much emphasis on keep striving. I think at a certain point, people, it doesn't, because it's no longer an issue. They figure that the die has been cast.
Quiet lives of desperation.
Quiet
lives of desperation.
So yeah, you could say that, but even just don't even think about their aspirations to what kind of human being they want to be. And I think you're unusual like that, because you're projecting.
Yeah, well,
Everyone's evolving. You're doing it. You're
I'm
thinking about
trying.
it, but
Yeah.
I don't think.
Well, I think, I
I think
mean, yeah, I mean, I think that it's, consciously or not, we're deciding who it is that we want to be every day by the choices we make, by the, actions we take or don't take.
right.
And yeah, I think that you're right that maybe not everyone approaches it maybe in a conscious, deliberate way throughout their lives. But one way or another, they are making these, important decisions and statements about who they are and what they're about, right? And this is not easy for, I don't think really for most people, if for anyone. But I think that this point that you make in this article about the healing power of relationships and how pivotal and crucial they are in shaping us, that we are, we have this rugged individualist ethos in our country, this like self-made man kind of, I did it myself, and no one
I
does
did it
anything.
my Frank Sinatra.
Well, yeah, I did it my way,
I
right?
did it my way. Oh man,
But this, we all are interdependent, and we are
that's
all
right.
products of our environments, our cultures, our relationships, our histories, and that, the best of us and the most like determined of us don't do it all alone. It's not
You're
literally,
not
it's
kidding.
not possible. And you know, as you pointed out, not everyone in their formative years has the benefit of positive role models and relationships in their lives. And it really begs the question. It kind of, to me, it begs the nature versus nurture question. I mean, I think both are
Mhm.
hugely impactful and important, but certainly the nurture shouldn't be overlooked, because someone can have all the promise and potential in the world, and if it's not encouraged or developed, or if the environment is not conducive to them realizing it, it's likely
Well, that's
not
right
going
where
to
some critical race theory comes in. Then, I mean, so many people have been deprived of that.
right.
Historically, structurally,
Right, systemically.
just systemically. That's right. Yeah, yeah. So, yeah. I think that's right. That's right. Yeah, and
So,
well,
okay, so you end up on this academic path, and I'm guessing that as a kid, this would never have dawned on you. Would you say that's true, or am I not
no,
correct in that?
yeah, no.
Like, you didn't have an interest in reading as a kid? You didn't have
I
your
did
head
that. Thanks to my brother. My brother
Okay.
said you could be tender, you could be a good, great receiver, and still read a book now and then.
Hmm.
That wasn't
They're not
something
mutually exclusive, right?
yeah, and I'm like, oh, you were reading books. Oh God, the 50s and 60s were like, oh, that's too effeminate to read a book
Hmm.
for a certain group of us.
Yeah, for sure. So what kind of things were you drawn to reading as a young person? Do you remember?
Oh, he had me read a separate piece, some
Hmm.
Steinbeck stuff. I mean, things like that. Nothing, but got me read some poetry. It wasn't something that consumed me, but at least I had a good attitude towards it.
Yeah, and somewhere along the line, you developed some serious writing chops, and anyone that explores your articles or books will see that right away. I mean, so this is something you must have cultivated at some point.
I cultivated, but I was bad at it. And Philip Rieff, whew. So there's another person in my life, this professor. I had to write something for him, and he just
The
went
one who
to
told you to aspire
identify
upward,
up.
identify up. Yeah.
Oh man. So we would always read things aloud, and he just laughed. He just like, this is just lifeless writing, cliche written. So this ear for developing it's a matter of developing an ear for cliches, and I'd rewrite things. And the cool thing about him was he so it was like a huge privilege to get. I said it was a huge privilege because he wouldn't do independent studies with many people. I don't know how the hell I wrote. Anyhow, was so.
This is at Penn, right? This is when
Yeah.
you're a
Oh,
grad
yeah.
student. Yeah.
And he really. He was so. we read, it was just just tear things apart. Like, this is lifeless language. What's this word doing here? So people who did, I didn't take any classes with them, but a tutorial. People told me that, I know people that did a class on Freud's article on negation, which was about 3 or 4 pages, and they spent the whole semester on it. Close reading. It's close reading, which he was very adamant about, and so I think it was a lot about developing an ear for like bullshit, empty phrases. And I complained about this a lot in philosophy, because in philosophy there's no emphasis on style, right? I mean, there's just zero. It's like you're supposed to write like a lawyer. Heretofore, this, in the following, in the next, and even the metaphors are, I'm sure so and so will make this move, like it's a chess game. Pisses me, and really pissed me off. And like the writing can be atrocious. And
well, that's what's so appealing about your book, The Existentialist Survival Guide, is it's very accessible. I mean, it's intellectually rigorous. It's not like I wouldn't call it light reading, but it's very accessible. And what makes your writing in general appealing to me, as I mentioned to you before we got started with the interview, is how much of yourself you inject in the writing. So to make points, you will freely write, reveal personal things, often things that are unflattering to yourself, experiences that you've had or ways in which you've behaved that were not you in your most shining moments. Right. But you reveal your humanity throughout the book as you're sharing the wisdom of various philosophers. And you give firsthand accounts as examples, and you're not afraid to, you freely share your own struggles and your own humanity. And this is what really makes your writing appealing to me and of interest and engaging, is because, this is a real person. This isn't some like lofty guy high up on a mountain disseminating wisdom. This is a real person with real struggles who's been through real stuff. And is not afraid to admit to feeling like an imposter or struggling with anxiety or depression. And I think that is a very helpful thing for readers to be able to. It helps them to connect with you and connect both with you and with the ideas that you're sharing.
The ideas, hopefully, yeah.
Because it's more, you know what I mean? It's personal, so it's not just abstract and off-putting.
Yeah, interestingly enough, Rieff, this great theorist, pushed me to after making me write things 100 times. He said some of the best things you ever write, you could sit down and write in an hour or two. So that was just a bit as a teacher, right? So here he's saying, on the one hand, you couldn't have a more rigorous writing. I mean, just you got to rewrite this. And then all of a sudden he says, go write unboxing. Some of these things you can. I got into writing unboxing because I wrote something for the New York Times on. I sent him an op-ed to Wall Street Journal once, and it got rejected at 25 places, which is something writers should. It was interesting, but
should be prepared for.
Well, not only that, but the fact that they got in touch with me. They said, we like your style, and Mike Tyson had been lost his boxing license at that point, and they said, could you write something on whether or not you think he should be able to fight again? And I said, like, give me a month, right? Or, as an academic. He said, you got 2 hours.
Yeah. Oh, wow. 2 hours.
And just somehow the muse came there. I was able to write something. But
deadlines help, right? They can help.
They constipation is the rule in academia. So I'm like, but it was Rieff helped me develop a personal voice.
Wow, that's cool. All right, so a couple more places I'd like to go here, and I think it's appropriate. I want to put a pin in this before we move on, which is that you talked about Philip Rieff as being a pivotal person in your life. you talked about the initial philosophy professor that put you on this path. And tell me the name again. I'm sorry.
Serge Kapler.
Serge Kapler, right. And then Beatrice
BB.
Beebe, the therapist that is still a part of your life. And, you know, you've had a life, I mean, a decades long relationship with that has been, it sounds pretty essential to your life.
Yeah.
And I want to ask you about your wife, Susan, because I imagine this is another pivotal person. So why don't we actually go there before we shift into boxing?
Yeah. So Susan,
how did you meet Susan?
Yeah, I met her at Penn, and she's a neuroscientist, brilliant lady, and she edited everything I write. We read it aloud together, and she's spent a lot of her certainly devoted a lot of her career to helping me out, and also even job wise. I mean, I was out of academia for a while because it's a lot easier to get a job when you're a neuroscientist than when you're an existential philosopher. We had to move around quite a bit, but she was pivotal in keeping and had a great year as an editor.
So you connected as fellow grad students?
Yeah.
At Penn. Interesting.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to say about Susan before we shift gears?
Yeah, just how there are many times when I was on a bunch of deadlines, coaching, teaching, and she had she put her own career aside. You know, she got back, she was out of neuroscience for 10 years, thanks to me. You know, and because I couldn't find a job, and we actually, she was in the Yale Medical School faculty, and I finally got so fed up with academia, I said, I got to get out of here. We moved to Maine, and she taught high school for a couple of years.
Wow.
And so she really made huge sacrifices and so the most important of all my influences.
Yeah. Okay. I want to shift this and talk a little bit about the sort of, contradictions involved in boxing, the good, the bad, the ugly. Because I find this fascinating, and I'm sure that there are other people that are curious about this dual identity you have as this boxer and boxing coach, and also this intellectual and, very studied philosopher. So I found a book review that you did of a book called Damage, The Untold Story of Brain Trauma in Boxing. The author's name is Tris Dixon. And
excellent book.
In that book, one of the people that the author interviewed was cited as having declared that, quote, boxing is American football head injuries on steroids, unquote. And you wrote in your review, it was a pretty positive review that you wrote of the book. And you said that in the end, Dixon's monitory work of love should serve as smelling salts to all of us involved in the world of the ring. As a veteran boxing trainer, I recommend assigning Damage as mandatory reading for everyone professionally involved in the sport. Joyce Carol Oates rightly observed, quote unquote, nobody plays. In other words, boxing is not play. And you wrote a piece, I believe it was for the New York Times, called In Defense of Boxing. And at risk of quoting you too much, I just want to read this short piece because I think it's so interesting that I think most of us would agree that boxing is dangerous, and some feel that it should be outlawed and banned altogether. But you wrote in this piece In Defense of Boxing that boxing not only reveals character, it develops it. As Aristotle and Kierkegaard taught, there is a risk in not taking any risks. Courage is the linchpin of the moral life. Building courage takes some practice coping with fear, and anyone who avoids all activity that comes with the possibility of physical harm is going to find it hard to develop the mettle that the moral life demands. As the piece on the New Girls Boxing Club makes plain, when well supervised, I think that's an important point, when well supervised, Boxing provides a workshop for learning how to deal with fear and other emotions that can level us like a left hook. So I want to ask you, Gordon, is boxing an outlet for violent impulses, or does it encourage them, or both? What do you think?
Well, I'm a pluralist when it comes to education. A lot of things like I taught at VMI, which was Virginia Military Institute, was the coach there, and saw that it was the perfect place for some kids. They flourished in that kind of environment. Other ones, so boxing is good for I think a lot of people. I think it's really good for. On the other hand, there are people who have the people that have been, as Tristan in his book makes clear. I mean, a number of people, but these are fairly, for the most part, advanced pros, right? The people he's talking about.
Yeah, in that book,
they could
yeah.
be journeymen. They might be journeymen, but they're people in professional boxing, most of them. And he's just saying that, and he's absolutely right, the kind of damage they take. And it's to some extent because they let fights go on that are ridiculous. And for every fight you have, like my fighter would have 60 rounds of sparring, at least, So yeah, it is dangerous. Yeah. But at the amateur level, none of my kids are going to get hurt. I don't unless there's something, some mysterious brain.
Yeah, and in our litigious society, I imagine it's sort of a risk just being a boxing coach in a sense. But you also must be pretty confident. You must be pretty confident that they're going to be safe in your supervised.
Yeah, but there's a lot of gyms you'll go into. They'll take kids and throw them in there right away to spar. My kids don't spar for months. Months, and then I got 3 steps with them. You train, you get the techniques down. We do some sparring where you can only throw jabs. Then I take you to a place where you can get in the ring and spar. Then I want you to see an amateur fight, because part of the fear is the adrenaline in those amateur fights. You might have 1,000 people there, and all of a sudden,
different thing.
So I want you to get educated before. Yeah, and in the first fights, I keep telling them, man, I said, in the United States, you got 1 minute rounds, 3 1-minute rounds. and they're dead after those 3. I mean, in Mexico, for example, even the lowest level of amateurs, it's 3 3-minute rounds. So anyhow, but it's really important if you're interested in boxing to make sure you go into a gym where where they're careful and don't throw you right in. But on the other hand, white collar boxing has all the rich guys and who want to be tough guys can go to can spend a fortune at Gleason's gym or wherever in New York to get boxing lessons. In the meantime, the local gyms who can't pay the rent are closing down. So there's a real economic factor going on there, where
as with so
not enough
things.
of rich guys to be rich, they got to be tough guys too.
Right.
Pisses me off. It pisses me off. Really.
So can you speak to, I'm interested in hearing from you the benefits from your perspective of boxing. I know from what you've written that it's a way of helping us deal with things like anger and anxiety and fear, and you see it as a productive way of an outlet.
Yeah,
for
I'm
those
actually. I think my next book is going to be on the moral education that comes from the sweet science. But people, for some reason, and I want to think about this more. People who know how to fight or think they can fight. They might not even be right, but who think they've got, these are more at home in their skin. They're more at home, and everyone's, and it's a funny phenomena, and I'm not so sure it's as training women's has been different for me, because for them, except for 1 or 2 cases I could think of, it was really an issue of getting rid of some aggression and feeling comfortable with it. Right. I mean, with a lot of women I've trained, it's very hard to get them to extend their arms to land upon. You know what I mean? They're pulling back naturally. They find it really invigorating. But for men, it's a identity marker. Who can kick whose ass? Right? I mean, look at the political debates. He's a fighter, I'm not going to back down, and you know what I mean. That even it's infiltrated our political system. But for some reason, this ancient ability to fight, and even not to carry on. You're asking too many good questions. I go on, and
it's my job.
No, but like, yeah, if you go to the Boxing Hall of Fame ceremonies in the summer, it's fascinating. Now, some of the guys have, been brain damaged by the sport. There's still there's some sense in which they're at home with themselves, which is really unusual, But yeah, it's dangerous. You got to be careful with it. You can't be too careful. And again, there are risks in not taking risks. Leading a risk-free life, from Kierkegaard's point of view, is the most dangerous life you could possibly lead.
Oh, and that of course brings me to the question I needed to ask you, which is, because Kierkegaard was another huge influence in your life, albeit not in the flesh.
Yeah, I'd say he was.
How and when? Tell me the circumstances under which you discovered Kierkegaard and how this, changed the trajectory of your entire life, really.
Yeah. So I had to drop out of graduate school after a breakup with my first wife, who I talked about it.
In the book, you mentioned that in the book, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we both had some problems with drugs and alcohol and stuff. But anyhow, so it looked like I was a goner to a lot of people, but I was in therapy in New York with Beatrice. And I was in a bookstore once and picked up his Works of Love, and it was a sheet of light. And the thing I got from it was that suffering is not a stench. The anxiety, in order to be a good person, you got to be able to deal with anxiety and depression. It's easy to be kind if all the lights are green, right? I mean, if you can't be a nice person, then you're really messed up, right? Isn't that true? And like, you're still gonna, but that in order to become the people we want to become, some of us want to become, we've got to be able to reach through that anxiety, depression, failure, grief, and he brought that home to me. He brought that home, and also he changed my faith relationship a lot, in the sense of he admitted his. A lot of Kierkegaard scholars will be pissed off at me for saying this, but he admitted that from an objective point of view, it's kind of crazy to think that the eternal came down and died, and right. I mean, so his recognizing the elephant in the room and still advocating the sleep of faith, or saying, well, make it or don't make it. It's up to you. It's his famous phrase, either or, right? It's up to you. But
just the fact that he could acknowledge that from a purely logical, reasonable, objective point of view, that there's no good reason to believe that it's not about logic.
Yeah, and you're not going to get there from an empirical point of view, and you do all the biographical studies you want, but the clock's ticking. The Bible says, believe. If you don't. So anyhow, that was helpful to me spiritually, taking the spiritual life more seriously.
Yeah, and I appreciate how in the book, I think it's very interesting that there are both theistic and non-theistic or atheistic threads to existentialism, because I think a lot of people probably are under the presumption that to be an existentialist automatically is to not believe in God.
Right. I was Sartre. Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Right.
But that there are some unifying ideas, and certainly like room for differences of opinion among the various existentialists that you include and you write about in your book. And so what would you say is unifies anyone that is labeled an existentialist, if it doesn't have to do necessarily with faith or belief in God?
Well, can I go back to,
please? I know I'm all over the place, right?
No, you're not something. You're all over the place. That you ask questions I want to. Okay, so Yeah, like even in a Luth, I mean, like St. Olaf is like the Notre Dame of the Lutheran tradition. I mean, it's like even in a place like that, you got not everybody's read the Bible. Like they're not. You could bring up. Used to be if you brought up arguments against God, kids would get really nervous. They'd shuffle their chairs. Now, if you bring up arguments against the efficacy of antidepressants, then they'll really get nervous, right? So even today, even in a school like this, it's like you got to give them the watered down notion of Kierkegaard, right? Okay, so here's what you can get out of Kierkegaard if you don't want to believe, right? But part of it is this insistence on, and Kierkegaard says, look, without any authority, there's no seriousness and obedience, right? And nobody wants obedience. Used to be like a virtue. Now it's like, how dare you tell me what to do, right?
Right.
You know what I mean? It's like,
Yeah.
how dare you?
I can't remember where I read it because I've really like been buried in your various writings over the last week in particular. But you talked, so it might have been in the book or it might have been elsewhere, but you talk about how what is considered a virtue is really completely dependent on context and environment and the time and the culture. That, like you said, at some points in time, obedience was like looked at as a high virtue, and in others, like maybe
now
a
it's
modern nerd, like now it's,
are you kidding me?
right now it's like think for yourself, right. So I thought that was a very interesting observation, just that, that there are, I think that there are some ideals that perhaps are transcendent, but a lot of values or a lot of things that are considered virtues are really contextual. Like, is it virtuous to be tough, or is it virtuous to be gentle?
Right.
As an example, it depends on the context.
But just this lack of this inability to accept the idea of authority, God forbid, is just blasphemous today. I've had students like go, "Hey, Gordon, what's up with this?" Like, I mean, they're just like, I say, you can call me Doc, Professor Marino. I'm not Gordon to you. God forbid, like you should say that, or So in the United States, a lot of these authorities is kind of hidden, don't you think? So Steve Jobs, all those guys, they all dress in jeans. You're right. I mean, the class structure's hidden, I think, and but there's this stubborn, like, don't tell me what to do attitude that, I don't know. I'm sorry, I took off there.
That's okay. That's all right. So what would you say then unifies the various existential thinkers that you've written about? If it's not necessarily a belief in God, what are the things that unify all of them, Kierkegaard included?
Yeah, so it's really a bunch of themes, and the roster really varies from person to person, from scholar to scholar. But freedom, choice, the anxiety that comes with choice, the limits of rationality. That's why existentialism has always become popular, like after World War I, after World War II, and even now, it's a lack of a recognition of the importance of the emotions, embodiment. So those are themes that seem to the importance of mortality, facing death.
It's so interesting. Maybe I can't see outside my own perspective. I wouldn't be the first person that was the case for. But when I read your book and when I read, existentialist ideas and thoughts, to me, they are so relevant. They're so absolutely relevant. It's hard for me to imagine someone, whatever their orientation is in terms of religion or philosophy, to not feel in other words, to me, existentialism deals with the realities of life, whatever your beliefs about them might be. Like, they're real. Like, these are things that we all have to deal with. Like
an existential threat, when we say, right?
Yeah.
So Sartre's phrase, existence precedes essence, is, that we don't have an essence. We're constantly creating ourselves. That notion. not forgetting. Kierkegaard used to talk about that many people think while forgetting they exist, so they don't bring their thought into reality, forgetting their existence. Right. So yeah, there's emphasis on reality, as you say. Yeah.
If you had not encountered Kierkegaard, do you think you would have pursued philosophy?
Oh, I was in philosophy.
You already were.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And it was terrible. It was analytic philosophy that drove me. Was not I got into philosophy through Plato. Plato was an ancient philosophy, which was great stuff, but some of the other stuff, oh mama man.
Right. Gotcha.
So it's funny because a lot of people get into it because you read somebody like Plato, beautiful writer, and then all of a sudden you're reading these dry articles that read like legal briefs.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
man.
It's also, I think it can be intimidating or in other ways discouraging for people to read the original texts because they can be so dense and inaccessible or dry, as you say. What would you say to people who are interested in philosophy but are averse to going to the source of things?
Well, most of those people could write. I mean, David Hume, well, they're beautiful writers. Take it slow, read it with somebody else, read a couple pages at a time. All right, don't be in a hurry. And that was Kierkegaard's big thing, is don't be in a hurry. Like he said, people want books they can read on during their nap or on Twitter now.
I was going to say, don't be in a hurry. Look at the attention span of humans in 2023. Whoa. Well, that's a problem, is it not?
Whoa is right. Yeah, put the quotes on Twitter. That's it, and yeah. So don't not to get into. And some of the languages, I mean, depending on who you read. I mean, suppose you're reading someone like Hume, a beautiful writer, but it's antiquated, much more complex. I'm sure you've noticed this. Letters from people earlier in the century, only 8th grade education, beautifully written, right? I mean, so don't get put off by the complexity of the sentence structures or whatever.
Take your time with it. I like your suggestion about reading it with a guide of some sort.
No, with a friend, or read Nietzsche. Read Nietzsche, beautiful. I mean, he's got a better style than Kierkegaard, I think. He's got a
as a writer. Interesting. On the genealogy of morals, is that a good?
But he's funny. It's also funny. He's also he just never. And so those are writers with style. Camus too. Camus is a beautiful writer. Beautiful.
Even in translation, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, good point. Yeah, even in translation, which is a big even.
Yeah. We could go on forever probably, but we don't have forever. So I want to wrap this up with maybe just a couple more questions. And the first one, you wrote an article, and you made reference to Freud earlier in this conversation, and you wrote an article called Freud as Philosopher. And in that article, you wrote that Freud more than once implied that what is fundamental to happiness is the ability to love and work. And that's his famous quote, right? About love and work. But you add to that is to be able to invest in something other than yourself, because whether it's a love relationship, and love you can define broadly, but whether it's a relationship of loving another person, or whether it's the work that you do, the idea, the link or the commonality of those two things is that they both involve investing in something other than just yourself, which I never really thought about that. So how do you suggest we overcome, let's face it, our innate selfishness, our innate selfish tendencies that are very much a part of, I think, just human nature? How do what advice do you have for either overcoming or transcending those tendencies in order that we might live a happier, more meaningful, more contributive life?
Well, I know about happier life, because getting outside yourself, investing in some things is going to be conflict with your with happiness. So screw happiness. I mean, it shouldn't be the what we want to become as people. That's Kierkegaard said that's that's fortune, that's lottery, and there's a lot of truth to that, right? I mean, even temperamentally, but it takes an act of self-awareness and will, right? So if
when you say
if I
even
want to,
yeah, when you say even temperamentally, do you mean that people have a different kind of set
yeah,
point
there's
for
some people.
happiness?
I mean,
Yeah,
that's few and far between, but some people and it's not because they're wealthy or anything, but they just have an even disposition or whatever. So, but certainly circumstances can really impact
sure.
your. I mean, all right. So we all know that, and to realize that even under bad circumstances, we have a duty we have an obligation to one another to be loving people. So. So for example, if you're in a situation where you want to go to a party, but somebody calls up and needs your help, and you can make up a lie easily, do the right thing.
I love it.
Use your
So,
willpower.
yeah,
Use your will, or take a pill. Do the right.
right. Gordon Marino, thank you so much for this conversation. I really appreciate your time and your sharing with me. I've really enjoyed your writings, and I would recommend, of course, to anyone listening or viewing this podcast, I think would very much enjoy Gordon's book, The Existentialist's Survival Guide. And you can also find his blog and learn more about him at his website, which is existentialistscorner.com. I will leave links to each of these things in the show notes. And so I would just like to, in closing, ask you now at this stage of your life, Gordon, who is the person you want to be? Who are you aspiring to be, having, at this moment in time, and looking forward from just having retired from teaching at St. Olaf's?
I'm sorry, our time's up. No, just trying to be kind and patient, and more patience and more kindness, and that's something I'm working on right now in my present situation.
Yeah, I hear you.
And that's big enough task for me right now. Can I add one other thing though?
Yeah, please.
I keep doing this too. No, also people, I get if people are reading something of a book or a conversation, or they're free to email me at marino@stolaf.edu. So if please put my email, and I'm also on Twitter. I don't know how long once Trump is done, I might have to go up, but I'm also on Twitter. But please, they should feel free to contact me, and I might not be able to get back to them right away, but happy to get into a conversation with anyone who's interested.
Excellent. Very kind and generous of you, good sir. And thanks again so much for this wonderful conversation.
Thank you. Thank you.
Take good care of yourself.
You too, man. Okay.
All right. Bye-bye.